Hi there. Hey, Sky. How are you? Hey, good evening.
Where are we?
Thank God. Thank God. How are you, Yaakov?
Baruch, I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
What page are we on?
183, I think.
Yeah, 182 or 183, something like that, yeah.
No.
I think we were finished with the Mishnah Brura.
There's it.
Hello, everybody.
Hi
We
there.
are on page 182 in volume 13. Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, section 4. We talked last week about Davar Shetibula B'Mashke, that the special washing of your hands if you're going to eat something that you dip in fluid, similar to like when we dip the karpas, the Seder night, we do urchatz, we wash our hands. So last week we learned the sources. The Shulchan Aruch said that when you eat a food dipped in one of the 7 liquids, which we said was yayin, dvash, shemen, chalav, tal, dam, and mayim, you should recite Netilas Yadayim without a bracha. Now, the question is, does this takana apply today? So, based upon what we saw so far, it's seen that although some Rishonim maintain that the institution of Netilas Yadayim is not applicable nowadays to a davar shetibula b'mashke, but the halacha psuka by the Shulchan Aruch Ramah was that it's still in effect. So, before discussing this issue in detail, let us first briefly mention the one well-known case of washing hands for a davar shetibula b'mashke that is observed today, namely urchatz at the Pesach Seder. As mentioned above in source 4, I think that was the Marami Rottenberg that it was quoted by. Before eating the karpas vegetable towards the beginning of the Seder, the universal custom is to perform the Netilas Yadayim without reciting a bracha. Orach Chaim Taf Ayin Gimel, which is the Hilchos of the Seder, Noitel Yodav L'Tzorach Tibul Rishon, you have to wash your hands for the first dipping, which is the karpas in the salt water, but you don't make it. So although everyone observes urchatz at the Pesach Seder, many individuals do not observe the practice of a Netilas Yadayim for davar shetibula b'mashke the rest of the year. Why do they observe it on Pesach alone, but not any other time? Is there a defense for this custom? Or is everyone who does not observe this the rest of the year, are they in error? So the Taz writes that our observance of urchatz should serve as a rebuke to everyone who is not careful to perform Netilas Yadayim when dipping the rest of the year. So the opinion of the Taz is we are supposed to do it the rest of the year. Noitel Yodav L'Tzorach Tibul Rishon, the Kol Shetibula B'Mashke Tzorach Netila. He cites the general rule that anything that you dip in a liquid requires you to wash your hands for it. And from the karpas dipping, Mikan Yesh Tochachas Megula, this is an open rebuke. La'osan Shein Nizar B'chol HaShon Litol Kodem Sheyochol Davar Shetibula B'Mashke. People who don't wash their hands before they eat something that is dipped. the manishtana laila zemikola yomim shebishana bimbalatar atzmo tfei b'laila zu avalayla zor al kaponim. You may have tshuva that maybe since you're trying to show an extra level of tahara on the holy night of the Seder. So maybe at least you should be nizer in this during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Shenizar Makol Echol Pashul Yisrael Davka, even though there's a general permit to eat paspalter. Paspalter is bread that's made by a goy as long as it's got kosher ingredients. So we are noyeg not to eat that Aseret Yemei Tshuva, even though the rest of the year we eat it. Davka elevad hakol lechol basar shel elevad she'en kan elach yitzron ziros v'medaktim lashros milaseya. The fact that we're not making the Netilas Yadayim before eating something that we dip is lack of observance of mitzvah. Now, other commentaries, though, understand this reason for why we do urchatz on the Pesach and we don't do it every time else differently. According to Lavush, we practice purifying ourselves through urchatz, specifically on the Seder night, to demonstrate our love for the holiday of Pesach. Says the Lavush, over there, not here in Netilas Yadayim, but in the din of Karpas. Afagav de B'shari Mos Hashana, Ein Nizar B'zeh. Even though Lavush acknowledges that we're not careful about this the rest of the year, After Mishum Chibas HaRegel, we love the Yontif, Vishu Tibul Shel Mitzvah, and this dipping is a mitzvah. No, go Atzmach B'tar Yoser. We do an extra tahara. According to the Lavush, Netilas Yadayim for a davar shedibul mashka is indeed. So right now we have a machloka, the Lavush and the Taz. And now that we have seen the approaches of some of the poskim to urchatz, we can proceed to examine how poskim decide the practical halacha for the rest of the year regarding tibula b'mashka. The Magen Avram, who is the commentator, who is the major commentator on the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, quotes the Lechem Chamudos, who reported in his time that many people did not perform the Tisadem when eating a food dipped in liquid, and they have a basis upon which to rely. Because of Alechem Chamudos, the Ha'olam Nogim Shalolito, the world doesn't wash. They have someone to rely on. Sha'atoisvis soivim came. Upukchazimai oma davar. Go look what Am Yisrael does. Footnote 5. The Netziv suggests differently that on the Seder night we modeled the practice in the Beit HaMikdash, where all rules of Tum and Tar were observed, including washing hands for davar shebitibul b'mashka. A third approach is proposed by the Chok Yaakov, that we observe it not because it must be observed the rest of the year, but rather so that the children will note the discrepancy between Pesach and the rest of the year and be inspired to ask more questions about it. These approaches seem to assume that the Tisadam is not necessary food duped in liquid the rest of the year, or at least there's a strong basis for the custom practice, for the common custom not to practice it. And see Brachos 45a, where Puk Chazi, my Amad Davar, go see what the people do. This expression is used by Gemara to say that if a common practice is clearly a certain way when the halachic rule is unclear, one can sometimes view the common practice as a de facto ruling of what the practical halacha should be. According to the approach that we just quoted in the Magen Avram, the urchatz on Pesach is in fact an exceptional practice that need not be observed the rest of the year, which is consistent with the approach of the Lavush, which was against the Taz. Now, the Mishnah Brura writes, in contrast, that many Achronim maintain that one should wash hands before eating a davar shetibula b'mashke. Yesh miktas harishonim desavi shlo yitzricha chabacham netis adam davar shetibula b'mashke ela b'meim. Shayu oichlem b'tahar mashe ein kein achsha shekulan t'mei mesim v'lekach lo yivrach an netis adam shesofek brachas lahakel. Chachamim required netis yadayim in their time because everybody was careful about eating their food b'tahara. Nowadays, we're all tamei, and we certainly should not recite the bracha on netis yadayim, because if we're uncertain whether the bracha should be, we always go leniently. The Hagah, v'hinei b'magen Avram, hevi b'shem alechem chamudos ta'odam noagim shelo litol, v'yesh lo mamash yispachu, I don't mix us a rishonim now. The Magen Avram brought the minig not to do it, and to rely on the Rishonim that said you don't have to do it. Aval harbe achronim echmiru ma'od b'davar v'kosvu. Da'eker karov apok mitzrach mitila medina v'apizon hazeh. The achronim said you need to do this, even medina. Lachein after odam enoagin levarich al kolponim enlachin lechol b'lin netila. Means don't make a bracha, but you should wash. This is also the ruling given by many Sephardic poskim, including the Yalkut Yosef. If you eat something that's moist, you're not eating in the regular Suda. The regular Suda you already washed for bread. You're eating something moist. You might eat a fruit, perhaps, that you washed, right? And it's wet. Or mishar mashkim tzonanim, or other cool liquids. Yain vash shemen zayis cholav talda. The lo nigiv, and it's not dried. Yesh bezer retivus shutofech hamnas latfech. It's very moist. Chemin matbil lotoch mashke. Or you eat something that you dip. Now, a corn chip that you dip in salsa is not a liquid. Salsa is like a food. I don't think that would qualify as the 7 liquids. So if you take a tortilla chip or something like that and dip it in a salsa, I wouldn't think that would qualify.
But you know, I wouldn't think honey's a liquid either.
I know, but there are 7 liquids that are mentioned by Chazal.
Gotcha.
So in a chanami, dvash is thick, but it's mentioned. Okay. The type of washing is like nitas yadayim washing. It means you have to use a kli, you have to use a revius, you have to, according to the Gra, one must even recite a bracha when washing one's hands in those cases. He says the earlier gaonim, verova poskim eskimu shegama idna, even today when there's no Beis Hamikdash noig kemo b'pasuk tzricha bracha v'chein ikar. Says the Gra. According to the Shulchan Aruch HaMekutzar, which is a halachic work written by Rav Yitzchak Ratzabi, which brings the Taimani practices, some Yemenites also have the practice of reciting a bracha when washing for a davar shetibul b'mashke. Ha'ochel davar shetibul b'mashke, afal b'shoyin nogea b'mokam b'mashke, even if you don't even touch where it's wet. Mikol makom tzarich litol yodav tchila kedin netilas lapas. Gam ken mevarach al netis adam l'fi minhag habladi. You make a bracha. Ulefi hashemi nota below bracha. I guess these were, like in the Temani world, there's baladi and there's shemi. Lefichach hametabel pas haba b'kistin kagon uga or biscuit. Let's say you dip a cookie in milk. That's what he's talking about. Tzarich netila. Achim amashke muvushal. Now he says if the liquid is cooked, gon te or kafe, yesh omrim she'ein tzarich netila. Then, if you dip your cake or your cookie in coffee or tea, then you don't need to wash. Lefichach yitol blo bracha, since there's a question yesh omrim that some he paskins you should wash but no bracha. Even those that normally, even though that normally make the bracha. Despite the ruling of the Mishnah Brura and many achronim to observe this halacha performing the tzedai for davar sheb'tibul mashke, some later achronim, such as the Aruch HaShulchan, do accept the more common practice as the practical halacha, in line with the approach of the Netziv and the Levush above. Other contemporary poskim that acknowledge the lenient approach is the Pnina halacha, Rav Eliezer Malamed, Rav Dov Lior, current poskim. Avalatos was koslu b'psachim, sham. The netila zueni mishum kedusha nekiyas kibepas. Like holiness and cleanliness. Ela mishum shelo yitma amashkim. It has to do with tumah. You would be prohibited to drink these fluids because that would puzzle your body. There's no special mishnah to listen to the words of the Chachamim, so you shouldn't recite a bracha. Kloimar, the Aruch HaShulchan, he passed away in 1910, around that time, said that Tumah V'tar doesn't operate today. We're not careful about Tumah. The Netilas Yadayim for bread comes from making ourselves holy. This is when you eat bread at a Suda Kvua. To prepare ourselves for eating Truma, that's called Srach Truma, was another reason which we brought. The Kevan Vizelo Shayachak to Vizkader here, by the dipping the liquid, it's not, there's no in to Vizkadashta. Certainly Lo Shayach Bracha. The Kama Rishonim serving came, many Rishonim hold like that. Certainly Bizman Hazeh, we don't need to wash for food as we dip. V'zeinerak Bizman HaKadmon. That's an ancient time, Sha'achlu B'tara, that people ate their foods B'tara. V'chein Kosav La'adeh HaTur, B'sim Tafayin Gimel, B'shem Harami Rattenberg, Mitam Zeh, Mekilim HaIdim, is that today we're all lenient about this. Page 188. Before discussing other aspects of Netilas Yadayim, as it relates to Davar Shetibul B'mashke, let us focus briefly on the case of Davar Shetibul B'mashke involving blood. As we saw above, blood is one of the 7 liquids that render an item susceptible to impurity. It's difficult to envision a scenario involving dipping a food into blood, being that blood is forbidden for consumption by the Torah. The Magen Avram suggests that indeed no practical case of dipping food in blood exists, but blood is mentioned together with the other liquids, and since they comprise one unit. The Gemara recites 7 liquids. Dam is one of them. So when you recite the list, you include dam. Dam kedei naspa means it was mentioned because you mentioned the other ones. As the asur lechol dam. The dam dogim v'chagavim lo mikri mashke. Blood from fish or blood from grasshoppers are not called a mashke. Those are permitted to eat. The Mishnah Berurah suggests that perhaps a practical scenario may arise if one must consume a food dipped in blood for medical reasons. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank initially suggests another scenario where blood could have been used, namely, where one dipped the head of a fruit or vegetable in blood and then ate the other side. According to the Ramah, one must still wash hands in such a case. However, Rav Frank then dismisses this possibility for two different reasons. It's an extremely uncommon scenario. It's forbidden to dip food in blood, since one thereby renders that part of the food inedible. Bal tashchis. Al dvar mashakasav amogen avram the dam kedei naspa. That dam really wasn't mentioned for a practical reason. Double vachi asur lechol dam because you can't eat it. Vehi razem malas kvodel if you ma mevusham dafilu mitabel rak rosh hayerek. So the Rav Tzvi Pesach wants to suggest maybe it's where you're dipping a head of something in filachi itol yadav. You're not touching that side, but it was dipped. So you might have to wash your hands. In case mishum zeh chashav gam dam. Shem rosh hayerek tovel b'dam v'oichel rosh hasheni. You eat the other side of it. Tzarach natila. Ulufum rihita ratziti loymar. So initially, I thought achazin dechmir al tibul b'mashke that we're machmir on this. Dula Rashi mishum tzrach truma, either because we're worried about truma or latoisus mishum damashke ol kabel tuma, the fluid will get tummy from our hands. V'chmir gam b'chulin of peiros. They were machmir by even non-hegdish food, chulin or peiros. V'kol zeh b'mashke natzma lochmir mishum lo shchichi sheyiga b'yadayim. They were not strict about the liquids themselves to, for example, require the tzidam for drinking, because you don't usually touch liquids with our hands. My time in lo shchiach, kam b'shus b'dayim lo gazru. So, even when you drink, you dip, you put water in your hands and you drink with your hands, you also don't have to wash. The fizeh is shloimar. According to this, the Mogen Avram wants to say, you can't eat food. It's not practical that you're going to take a head of lettuce and dip it in blood. And therefore they wouldn't make exer for something that's so uncommon. And it would be prohibited to dip something in blood. You won't be able to eat it. It's like baltashkis exer shem yavol achlo. Maybe you come to eat it. No difference than, for example, if you take something that's prohibited and you can't put it on a kli, that's a permitted kli, because you're going to damage the kli. The kli is going to absorb the treif piece of meat, and you damage the davar heter. The logar simchaygav natis yadayim. So that's what the Rav Tzvi Pesach says. That gave us some insight about the blood. Now, page 190. Davar shetibula b'mashke, where you don't touch the food. Many achorim do recommend performing tisadayim when eating a food dipped in liquid. Those who follow this approach would need to wash their hands before consuming, for example, a fruit that has been rinsed in water, like we mentioned before. It's not yet dry. Or a canned vegetable, such as corn or pickles that are still moist. However, there are a number of details that must be clarified. One of them pertains to cases where one does not touch the food directly. Like, let's say you use a fork. You don't touch it with your hands. Does the halacha of davar shebil mashka apply also if one does not usually touch the food but eats it using a bowl or silverware? For example, one would have to wash hands before eating cereal with milk, right? Cereal is fluid. We said chalav is one of the fluids, but you're not eating with your hands, you're eating with a spoon. Now, a fruit that's washed, we tend to eat it with our hands, so that might be an issue. The Mishnah Berurah writes that if most people eat the food with silverware, then the Netilas Yadayim is not required. Achronim iskimu. That's very interesting. You know, the pickles, the Israeli pickles that come in that can. Sometimes I'll use a fork and a knife and cut it, and you eat it with a fork, like this cut pickle. But most people eat that pickle with their hands, right?
Yeah.
So that would be something that you'd have to wash for as well, because you don't use silverware for that. Cooked food, people don't eat that with their hands. They eat with a spoon. Maybe you'll come to touch it, but you don't need it. Like a fruit that you're going to touch with your hands. A food that usually touch with one hand. Even if you eat it with a kli, you have to wash. Like, for example, if you cut an apple up into pieces, even that, most people tend to eat that with your hands. No, I'm saying even if you cut it into pieces. The Yakut Yosef rules this way as well. You eat vegetables in soup, for example, not during a meal where you wash, or orez, or rice. They're moist. They kafel with a spoon or a fork. You don't have to wash your hands. We don't eat it with our hands. But if the minig is to eat it with your hand, even though there are times where you might eat it with a spoon or a fork, if it was dipped in liquid, so for example, a dry apple, you don't have to do it. But if it's rinsed it and it's wet, then you'd have to wash. According to Ramah, even if one touches the dry part of the food alone without the moisture, you have to be stringent in performing tisadai. The Mishnah Berurah explains the reason for this, is that when we come to dip the entire food in liquid, you have to wash because we're concerned you're going to dip the whole thing. Also, when you rinse a fruit, you don't just rinse part of the fruit, you rinse the whole fruit. Based upon this, the Piskei Tshuva states that if it is not customary to dip the entire food in liquid, such as dipping a cracker into soup or a hot drink and eating it, that's a reason to be lenient. You don't dip the whole cookie in the milk in one shot. You dip a part of it. Like he says, cake, in soup or in a liquid. You go to because you're careful. You don't want to get your fingers in the hot liquid. It's no different than eating with a spoon. Is the halacha, page 192. Is the halacha for dipping less than a kazayas of food into liquid more lenient with regard to the tisadai? The Mishnah Berurah writes that even those who are machmir to perform the tisadai for cases of davar shetibul b'mashke may be lenient when the food is less than the size of a kazayas. The reason is that, as we will see later in the shiur, many are lenient even concerning tisadai for bread. If one eats less than a kazayas, though some are stringent. So, if you don't have to do it this time for bread, less than a kazayas, you certainly don't have to do it for davar shetibul b'mashke if it's less than a kazayas. Hamako, the pachos b'kazayas nearly pashut shein la'achmir b'zeh klal. Tafil b'pasar be'achronim. It says even by bread. There are many later poskim that don't require the tzedayim if you're going to eat less than kazayas. On the other hand, the Piskei Tshuva notes that the Mishnah Berurah later added a gloss to his work, indicating that the matter is not so simple. Uva Mahadur Sabos, that means in later editions, the Mishnah Berurah added a Hagah, Bishulei Adaf on the sides of the page. Shechoizer bo psak. He went back on this psak. V'neisha betur, le'inyan tibula karpas. When he discussed karpas, muchach sheyesh chiv netila av pachos mikazayis. There we do the netila even if you're eating less than kazayis. Remember, we there were very machmir. We always remind the people of the Seder, eat less than the kazayis. Because we're going to have the morer later on, have kavanah to eat less than kazayis. Yet we have to do netilas yadayim. So the Torah proves from there that you have to do netilas yadayim even for less than kazayis. Ubebir alocha there in Karpus, nisha b'tzarachiyun b'zeh, and the Mishnah Berurah himself left it as a tzarachiyun. So the Piskei Tshuva is telling us that the Mishnah Berurah may have gone back on his initial leniency that you might not have to do it if it's less than kazayis. The Piskei Tshuva then notes, though, that many poskim are still lenient about netilas yadayim for dipped food that is less than kazayis, since, like we said, even washing hands before bread, there is basis for being lenient when eating less than kazayis. We shouldn't close our eyes to the many achronim that this inyan of needing a washing before you eat a dipped food, if you eat less than kazayis, it's not a problem. It can't be more stringent than washing for bread. That the Shulchan Aruch himself said we don't need netilas yadayim for less than kazayis. Regarding karpas, the Chida already answered it. B'tuv tam. Even though there are those that are machmir, those who are lenient and don't, it makes more sense to be lenient. Other issues regarding tibula b'mashka, where it doesn't apply, we saw above in source 22 that according to Piskei Tshuva, hot liquids such as soup or tea may be defined as halachic liquids, but others disagree, as reported by the Yalkut Yosef. But there was a nechleku hamarimat umara ben yoish poiskim in mashke shnispashel yeshel of toras mashke. Does a cooked liquid, can it still be called a mashke? Ulvasof hoida marimat mikoach harai beperek elu dvarim. That the marimat conceded that it's not a liquid if you cook it. V'shekena yam alam de Rabba Marash Sagis. Marash Sagis also that shemashke shnispashel bo ochel, the fluid that food was cooked in it, and it's arbo tama oichel, and there's the flavor of the oichel like a vegetable in the liquid. Bottle mimenu toras mashke, it's not considered a liquid anymore. V'harei hu ka'oichel, it's like a food. So soup would certainly be considered a food and not a mashke. Uv'sheri knesses agdoila. That if the liquid that you're dipping something in is hot, then it's not a problem. You don't need to wash for it. Umoria Rav, the fakir was questioned it. So the Yalkut Yosef writes in his opinion, one may be lenient only when 2 out of 3 of the lenient factors are present. The size of the food is less than kazayas. you don't touch the liquid directly, and it's cooked. So you have 2 out of 3 that allows you to be lenient. So he gives you the ha'echel uga ubiscuit pachos mikazais. You're eating a piece of cake or a biscuit, cookie, which is less than kazais. Umatbilo toch koste o kafecha. You dipped it into a hot tea or hot coffee. Afilum yadav nogos b'mashke, and even if his hands touch the liquid, in tzarchli tol yadav mishum davar shedibu b'mashke, you don't have to wash. Even from a tablet b'davar mavushal. Number 1 is cooked. The gamu pachos mikazais. So you have 2. If you ate a kazayas of cake, and then you dipped it in a hot liquid, and his hands touches the wetness, if they don't touch the wetness, now, if the mashka is lonis basha, if the fluid is not cooked, and his hands touch the wetness, even if eating a cookie less than kazayis, if he's careful not to touch the liquid, you could be lenient if you're dipping your cookie in cold milk, if you're careful not to touch the liquid, and you eat a pachos mikazayis. Then he says, you have bread that's like French onion soup, where they sometimes have bread in the soup. And you're not eating it during the meal where you washed. You don't need this netilas yadayim for tibul b'mashke. Kiven shoachla yadei kaf. Number 1, you're eating with a spoon. V'gam udavar mevush. It's cooked. V'mir tzalach v'lital yamidin pas. He wants to wash because you could be machmer on yourself for bread less than kazayas. He says you have no problem if you want to do that. Other poskim, such as the Pnei Halacha of Malamed, maintain that one may be lenient when any one of those factors are present. Like if the food is less than kazayas, if you don't touch the liquid, or if the liquid is cooked. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach proposes an innovative idea in this concept, saying that if one eats a food dipped in liquid that is secondary to a different food, one may be lenient not to perform this time, even if one is usually is machmir. Even the chen yesh lakel b'natila zu, the dover shetibul b'mashke b'sha'ochlo ketofel l'machel achar she'ein tibul b'mashke. Kigon achilas kugel im malafafon. So if you eat kugel with a pickle, she'ein levarchel am malafafon mishum tofel. Right, you have ikar and tofel. You have that when you make a bracha. You have to decide what is ikar, what is tof, what is primary, and what is secondary. So if you're eating pickle, you don't make the bracha on the pickle because it's tofel to the kugel. The minor secondary food doesn't need any bracha. If it's not included in the bracha of the primary food. According to Rav Shlomo Zalman, one would not need to wash the Tisadaim to eat a cucumber and cracker together, even though one does not use silverware to eat it, because the cucumber is secondary to the cracker. The cucumber is wet. It's not a problem because it's secondary. We can summarize our discussion concerning the Netilas Yadayim for foods dipped in liquids by saying that the widespread custom is not to wash for such food nowadays. And some poskim indeed justify the custom of not washing. Many achronim, including Mishnah, do recommend being stringent. But even according to the stringent approach, Netilas Yadayim will often not be necessary due to a number of other potential leniencies, including if the food is less the size of kazayas, if one eats it with silverware, or if one does not dip the food entirely into the liquid.
I'll repeat what I said last time. I don't remember what Ramosha did, so I don't have anything to add on that. I've never seen anyone do it. I just have never, maybe I just didn't notice it, but I just don't recall ever in my life seeing anyone wash for dipping food in water or any other liquid.
It's certainly not a minig that any of us are
Right.
used to seeing.
Yeah.
Let's go to 197. The minimum amount of bread for Netilas Yadayim. And this is an important shiur for us regarding pizza, right? There are a few other important issues within the halachas of Netilas Yadayim that have not yet been addressed within the last few shiur. For example, what is the minimum amount of bread that one must eat in order to be obligated to Netilas Yadayim with the bracha? The Sefer Rokeach, who's a Rishon, writes that the minimum amount of bread eaten that without question requires this time is a kibetza, the size of an egg. If one eats less than this amount of bread, which is approximately 56 grams, it is uncertain whether Netilas Yadayim is required, and one should therefore wash his hands without a bracha. You should wash, but don't make a bracha. The Beis Yosef explains why the Rokeach said that. Nira, food that's less than an egg cannot acquire tumah. The Chacham didn't require netilas in such case. The suffix might be because maybe the Chachamim required netilas for bread. They made a low clue. That's why he told me suffix. According to Beis Yosef, the Rokeach is unsure whether the requirement of Netilas Yadayim applies only to foods of a size that they can become impure due to tumas ochlin, which is a kibetza, or whether Chazal did not distinguish with regard to size in the context of Netilas Yadayim. The Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the Rokeach that one should perform Netilas Yadayim without a bracha when eating less than a kibetza of bread. Yesh misha oimer sheme'ena oichel al pachos b'kibetza yito yodav lo yivah. Now, despite the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, the contemporary Sefer Vizos HaBracha, which is the Sefer on Brachos, writes that it is customary to recite a bracha even when washing for a piece of bread that is the size of a kazayis, based upon the Gra. U'v'di'evet rabim moirim shedai b'kazayis. V'shulchan Aruch posek shetzarach kibetza l'Netilas Yadayim. Acha Gra soifer, the Gra argued, one of the great scholars of the generation, he thinks it refers to Rav Yosef Sholem Elyashiv, said that you can be soymech on the gra, and v'chein nifsek bigras Moshe. He says Rav Moshe Paskin that you can wash and make a bracha even on a kazayis. What is the halach if a person eats less than a kazayis of bread? The size of a kazayis in contemporary measurements will be discussed in more detail in volume 14. Many authorities assume that's approximately 27 cc's. But some calculate a kazayis as larger than this. Others calculate it as less. Does the uncertainty of the Rokeach still apply? And should one still perform the Netilas Yadayim without a bracha? Regarding this question, the Rokeach is cited by the Beis Yosef as saying that one need not perform the Netilas Yadayim at all if it's less than a kazayis. Someone Reish Pei Gimel Kosav and Oitli Deim of Varch Netilas Yadayim they should trach l'tavel tibul sheni b'maror. This is Rachza. They recite the bracha on Netilas Yadayim. You have to dip a second time in the maror. Aval achilas matzah sh'ai yotze b'kazayis ain't tzarich netila. But matzah, where you could be makayv the mitzvah with just a kazayis, you might not require netila. The apachos b'kazayis ain't tzarich netila. Cannot read in the sukkah. Very weird You gotta eat at least kazayis. You're not eating less than kazayis. I don't know what the Beis Yosef wants here with the rokeh. Mitzvah is to eat a kazayis, so you would require it till Sidai. It's not pachas b'kazayis. The Shulchan Aruch records this opinion. Imoichel pachas b'kazayis. Yesh mi sho'omer shein tzarech netilah. The Mogen Avram challenges the ruling of Shulchan Aruch and argues that in reality, the Sidai must be performed without a bracha, even when eating less than kazayis of bread. Just as it is for eating less than kazayis of bread, that's a kabeitz of bread. The Mogen Avram explains that in his opinion, this is the correct text of the Rokech. Rav Karo, who quoted the Rokech as saying, since washing is not necessary for less than kazayis, had an inaccurate version of the text. Really, it meant less than kabeitz. Nuscha mutes, nizdan al Rav Beis Yosef. The Mogen Avram says that Rav Yosef Karo had an improper text of the Rokech, which makes sense. Like we said before, on Pesach, you got to eat at least a kazayis matzah. So it can't be less than kazayis matzah. I'm not sure why they didn't use that as the raya. It's clear that he's talking about less than kabeitza. Can I bring in the Sukkah of Brachos? The matzah nami. Oh, the matzah nami boy kazayis from Cain. Kol hasiif zeto soifer. It's all an editor's error. V'chein kasav alechem chamudas. A number of Achronim agree with the ruling of Shulchan Aruch and do not accept the position of the Mogen Avram. Nevertheless, the Mishnah Berurah writes that it's good to be stringent to perform the Tisadayim even when eating less than kazayis of bread. This is also the opinion of the Pnei Halacha and the Piskei Tshuvos. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. The Taz said you don't need the Tisadayim for less than kazayis bread. V'cheinu das habach, v'cheinu iskim agra, v'birkei Yosef. Then he came to Shem Rashbat. The das lechem chamudus from Mogen Avram ve'eli rabba v'achronim. The af bepochus bekazayis dina kepochus bebeitz of yitol yodov v'lo yivarach. While kein lechatchila nochon lachmer bezeh. He says it's ideal to be stringent, to wash and to make a bracha. Well, he doesn't say, he says nochon lachmer bezeh, to wash. Doesn't say whether you should make a bracha or not. Really, you should do it without a bracha. The Yaakov Yosef writes in his opinion that Allah is in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, which is usually the Yosefs follow Rav Yosef Karo, that one need not perform the Tisdayim when eating bread less than the size of a kazayis. However, he praises one who is stringent. Doesn't have to wash. If he has a mind to eat a kazayis, but don't make a bracha. 51 gram, then you have to make a bracha. Without a bracha, because I is tovalov bracha. Yesh machmim litol yedayim b'li bracha b'chilas pas kashir ke 18 gram. Nitilas yadayim when feeding others. You're a caregiver, and you're helping to feed a chola. Is the tis required? The tis required in a case where one individual feeds another. If you're feeding a child, feeding an elderly person, even if the one feeding is not actually eating, or does even coming in contact with the food obligates one to wash? So this is discussed by the Gemara in Chulin. Somebody who's feeding, the one who is being fed requires natilas yadayim, even though he doesn't touch it. But the Michael, the one who feeds, ain't a tzarech natilas yadayim. Rabbeinu Yonah the Rishon explains that the obligation for performing natilas yadayim applies only to one eating bread, not to anyone who touches bread. Therefore, one who feeds bread to someone else need not wash natilas yadayim first. Must ensure that the one who's eating washes his hands before beginning to eat. If someone's being fed, he has to do natilas yadayim. Even if he doesn't touch the bread that he's being fed, he has to wash. The one who's feeding should be careful not to feed him unless he sees him washing his hands. Otherwise, the feeder, the one who's feeding the other person, does not have to wash his hands. The obligation is on the one who eats. A fork. Let's say he's not going to touch the bread, he's going to eat with a fork. You have to make the til sedayim. Shulchan Aruch brings the halacha. Hamachil lachem ein tzarich netil sedayim. The one who feeds does not need netil sedayim like we've been learning. But ha'oichel, one who eats, the other person is putting the food in his mouth, and he's not touching the food, but he has to watch. Same thing if he eats with a fork. Fork, bilaz. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. In fact, you may not feed the guy if he hasn't washed. The Levush explains that the reason the Tzurba is not imposed upon one who feeds another is that the decree of washing due to Shrach Tumo was not imposed in uncommon cases. It's not Shchiach. The Gzeira was made on the person who eats. The one who feeds, there's no Gzeira. The lo shech ligzor b'shum shrach tumo milsa lo shchicho. Feeding someone is not common. Milsa lo shchicho lo Tzurba M'Rabanan. Now, how do you do netil sedayim? It's well known that for netil sedayim before eating bread, one needs to pour water twice on each hand. This practice is mentioned by the Mishnah Berurah. Tzarich litol shnei pavim al yadav, the b'shvicha rishona metar yadav. With the first pouring, it purifies. Aval hamayim atzmam tmeim. The water that remains on that hand is tamei. Shenitmu miyadav. U'shvicha shniya metar soisa. So the second pouring then purifies. V'nigma etar sedai. Achenim nishpach haravius b'vasachas. Now, if the revius poured in one shot, al shtei yadav, or sheshafach revius shlema al kol yad v'yad, that's raboskim de'etzrach l'mayim shniyim. If you dumped a revius on one hand, and then on the other hand, you don't have to do it twice. Most poskim maintain that one does not need the second water, and that's how the Shulchan Aruch works. Now, the Pnei Halacha explains the reason for pouring twice on each hand in succession, like this: 1, 2, 1, 2. Right? We don't do it like the sirugin, like in the morning. Right, left, no. Here it's dump, 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 dump. And my wife has that minhag. I don't know if anybody else here has that minhag, but my wife, when she came from her home, that's how she washed her hands. I don't think anybody in this group has that same minhag. Does anybody have that minhag of washing twice?
You mean alternating?
No.
Doing the way you're suggesting.
No. When I washed my hands, I used a full revius and I would make sure I would use a full revius on one hand, but I only wash once. And a full revius on the other hand, washing once. My wife came from her home with the minhag, like the Mishnah Berurah is bringing. One. She did it twice. Does anybody else have that minhag?
Yes.
Of washing twice?
Yes.
No. Have that, Yaakov?
Yeah, because you don't always know you're going to have a revius. Today it's easier, you have more water, but it doesn't always happen.
Okay, so I see the minute came to avoid the problem if you didn't have a revius.
Right.
Where the Mishnah is explaining. And now the Pnei Halacha, the Tzurba M'Rabanan explains another reason for pouring twice on each hand in succession. And why it differs from the Tzadam after waking up in the morning, where there's an alternating pouring 3 times. Tachlis Seder on Atila, Noitim Chilas Yad Yamin, Pamayim B'Ritzifut, twice quickly. Nachakach Noitim Es Yad Shmol, Pamayim B'Ritzifut. Umagdimim Yad Yamin, you do the right hand first. This is a Kabbalistic concept. And then when you dry your hands, you should lift your hands like this with the fingers up. That means even for bread, the ari washed 3 times. You bring your hands up to your head, and then you bend. You have to alternate. Right, left, right, left, right, left. And those of us who have the minhag of the growth to do it the 4th time. Sleep is a different reason. Ruach ra shel yadayim. This is this tumah that's on our hand from a demon. How do you remove the demon? This alternating washing. But washing for bread, lo rak shein tzarich litol l'sirug, and I laugh at. You don't want to alternate. You want to do 2 washings in succession. If the first washing ended up less than revius, they might have purified the hand of the water on the hand, you shout tmeim. Just the second netila will get rid of that. Then the water will be matar with what you've done. So he says very clearly, we now know the reason why you wash twice. Even though you do it twice, the first washing you should try to do a revius. That way, all the poskim will say you retire your hand. Another important point concerning the process of Tisidayim that we will mention only in brief is that while one is in the midst of washing, one should make sure the unwashed hand does not touch the washed hand, as this involves that the water was supposed to wash again. If you poured water on one hand, but you rubbed it with the other, it didn't help. Even at the end, you poured both of your hands. The water that you dumped on your hand the second time became tummy. And when you rubbed it with the other hand, it must tame the other hand. The second pouring is only only comes to purify the water that became tummy through your hand. If you poured water on one hand, and it touched the other hand, you have to dry your hand. You have to start again. Rav Melamed explains the foot that the Raiva disagrees requires washing twice, regardless of how much water is used the first time. Therefore, common practice is to wash twice to accommodate the Raiva. But b'diavad, washing once with a revius is sufficient. Okay, we will stop here. We'll have one little second left in terms of how can you be mafsik between the Netilas Yadayim and Amotzi? And then we're gonna go into Amotzi. It'll segue nicely into the laws of the Amotzi. Questions, comments, Ha'arot?
I don't know if we learned it here or not. I missed 1 week and I haven't listened to Shir yet, but I know that the halacha is that you can't wipe your hands on your clothing. So I'm not sure that if we studied that or not, but they don't seem to mention drying. But I recall from others that the halacha is you can't use your clothing to wash. You can use someone else's clothing, but not your own. So just point that out.
They didn't bring that halacha. They brought the halacha that we make the bracha prior to drying.
Yeah, that's also.
Because oiver la'asiyasa. That was the issue of drying, but that's an interesting halacha.
Yeah.
That, it's not covered, I guess it's bizayon, right? The reason we wouldn't be able to wash our clothing, bizayon, not lack of covet for our clothing. It's our,
To dry it on somebody else's clothes is also a bit bizarre.
Not the same level of design. I learned it, I think it was in the Simchas Chava where we covered the same thing. But yeah, that is our.
okay,
Okay,
good.